There was a time when you could assume the person on the other side of the screen was real. A human wrote the comment, posted the picture, recommended the product, started the argument, or clicked the like button. Today, that assumption is harder to make. Open almost any major platform, and you'll find accounts posting around the clock, comments appearing within seconds, thousands of people seemingly agreeing with the same opinion, videos narrated by voices belonging to people who don't exist, images of events that never happened, reviews written by customers who never bought anything. And increasingly, machines are creating content for other machines to find, rank, summarize, repost, and recommend. Somewhere inside all of this is an old internet conspiracy theory with an unsettling name: the dead internet theory. Its original claim was extreme. Much of the internet was no longer being created by ordinary people. Bots, automated systems, corporations, and algorithms had quietly taken over, leaving humans wandering through an artificial version of the web. For years, it was easy to dismiss. Then the internet changed. Artificial intelligence became capable of producing more convincing posts and online identities. Bots became better at behaving like people. Algorithms became better at deciding what people see. And something else began happening. Artificial intelligence started producing enormous amounts of the material that now exists online. And future AI systems may increasingly encounter that synthetic material when learning about the world. Researchers have a name for one possible consequence: model collapse. A machine learns from human-created information. It produces, shares, and recycles the data, and also learns from it. The copy begins learning from the copy. And suddenly, the strangest part of the dead internet theory isn't what it claimed had already happened. It's how easily something like it could happen now, because there's another problem. Humans have always looked to other humans to understand the world. When thousands of people appear to believe something, we notice. When everyone seems to be talking about something, it feels important. When an opinion appears popular, standing against it becomes harder. But what happens when the crowd itself can be manufactured, and when the people influencing what you believe might not be people at all? The early internet felt different, not because it was better, but because much of what you encountered had a human behind it. Someone built the website, wrote the blog, uploaded the photograph, or sat at a computer and typed the comment you were reading. The internet was messy, amateur, and often anonymous, but even anonymity had something distinctly human about it. Psychologist John Suler described something called the online disinhibition effect. When people communicate behind screens, especially when their identity is hidden, they behave differently than they would face to face. They'd reveal things they would normally keep private. They might become unusually generous or unusually cruel. The screen created distance, but we still assumed there was another person. That assumption became the foundation of online life. We joined forums because other people were there. We read reviews because strangers had tried something before us. We watched view counters rise because thousands of other people had apparently decided something was worth watching. And over time, those signals became familiar. Psychologists call one part of this the mere exposure effect. Repeated exposure to something can make it feel more familiar, and familiarity can influence how we respond to it. Online, repetition was everywhere. The same website, the same username, the same voices returning to the same communities. Slowly, strangers began to feel familiar, but the internet didn't stay small. Personal websites gave way to enormous platforms. Chronological feeds became recommendation systems. What we saw was increasingly selected and delivered to us automatically, and the signals we had learned to trust remained. The likes, comments, and follower counts were still there, but something fundamental was beginning to change. For most of the internet's history, the question was what other people were doing online. Eventually, we would have to ask a different question. How many of them were actually people? Sometime during the late 2010s, a strange suspicion began circulating through obscure corners of the internet. People felt that something had changed. The internet seemed larger than ever. More websites, accounts, posts, and more people apparently talking at once. And yet, to some users, it somehow felt smaller. The same ideas, jokes, arguments, and content started appearing more frequently, moving through enormous platforms. Eventually, that feeling developed into something much more extreme. In 2021, a user named Illuminati Pirate published a post on Agora Road's Macintosh Cafe titled, "Dead Internet Theory, Most of the Internet is Fake." The post drew from ideas that had already circulated through smaller online communities. But this version gave the theory a name, a structure, and a much larger audience. The claim was extraordinary. According to its most extreme interpretation, much of the internet was populated by non-humans. Bots were creating activity. Algorithms were deciding what became visible. Artificial accounts were interacting with real people, and potentially with one another. Some versions went considerably further, suggesting governments and corporations were deliberately using these systems to manipulate public perception. The alleged death of the human internet was often placed somewhere around 2016 or 2017. There was no evidence that the internet had secretly been replaced by machines. There still isn't. But something about the theory survived. Not necessarily because its central claim was true, but because some of the things it described were real. Bots, fake followers, spam networks, and coordinated influence campaigns were real. And automated internet activity was already enormous. Imperva reported that automated systems accounted for 49.6% of the web traffic it measured during 2023. But that number requires context. It doesn't mean half of the people you encounter online are fake. Web traffic includes enormous amounts of automated activity most users never see. Search crawlers, data collection, monitoring systems, malicious bots, and other automated requests moving between machines. Imperva classified 17.6% of the traffic it measured as good bots and 32% as bad bots. So the number is striking. But it's not proof of the dead internet theory. What it does show is that machines already account for a substantial amount of activity moving across the web, and that distinction matters psychologically. When we enter an online space, we rarely evaluate every account from the beginning. We look for clues, a profile picture, a posting history, a familiar writing style, or other people responding. This resembles what communication researchers describe through uncertainty reduction theory. When we know little about someone, we gather information that helps us decide who they are and whether they can be trusted. Online, almost every one of those clues can now be manufactured. A profile photograph doesn't guarantee a person, nor does a long posting history. Even a convincing conversation no longer guarantees a person. Then repetition creates another problem. The illusory truth effect describes a simple tendency. Repeated information can become easier to process. So imagine encountering the same claim again and again. To the person scrolling through them, it can look like independent agreement, but the viewer usually cannot see the machinery behind the screen. 10 accounts might represent 10 people, or one person, or an automated network. That uncertainty is where the dead internet theory becomes more interesting than its original conspiracy. The evidence doesn't show that humanity secretly disappeared from the internet, but the modern internet no longer requires a human being behind every post. And generative artificial intelligence has dramatically lowered the effort required to produce all of them. That leaves us with a more useful question than whether the old theory was right. What happens when something that looks like a crowd no longer requires one? A bot doesn't need to convince you that it's human forever. Sometimes it only needs to look human long enough to be counted. A view, share, or comment means very little by itself. But multiply that activity across thousands of accounts and something different begins to appear. Social bots are automated accounts designed to perform actions on social platforms. They can distribute news and provide alerts or answer routine questions. Others are built to imitate human participation. They can follow accounts and repost material while interacting with users at a scale no individual person could maintain. Researchers have documented these networks for years. In one large study published in Nature Communications, researchers examined roughly 14 million messages linking to hundreds of thousands of articles from low-credibility sources on Twitter. Only a small portion of the accounts in one sample were classified as bots. But those accounts were responsible for a disproportionately large share of the activity spreading low credibility material. The bots were especially active during the first moments after an article appeared. They also targeted influential users through replies and mentions. Humans frequently reshared the material. That finding matters because artificial activity doesn't have to remain artificial. A machine can create the initial exposure, and a human can carry it forward. But measuring bots is difficult. Researchers don't have a perfect test that can look at every social media account and determine with certainty whether a human or machine is behind it. Bot behavior changes and detection systems can disagree. Some accounts also combine automation with human control. A 2025 study examining bot detection methods described the problem as challenging and unresolved, so claims about exactly how many social media accounts are bots should be treated carefully. The stronger evidence concerns behavior. Accounts can coordinate their activity to promote the same material within short periods of time. Researchers studying coordinated campaigns have even documented short-lived astroturfing attacks designed to push topics onto trending lists before deleting the activity that helped put them there. Other researchers have found coordinated link sharing behavior on Facebook by using statistical patterns to distinguish it from ordinary sharing. This is where the psychology becomes important. Human beings use other people as information. We might assume a crowded restaurant is worth visiting, or trust a product more because thousands of people reviewed it positively. The same thing happens when millions of views make a video seem important before we've even watched it. Psychologists commonly describe this broader tendency as social proof. When we're uncertain, the behavior of other people can influence what deserves our attention and what we consider credible. Online, much of that social information has been converted into visible measures of popularity. Those numbers help us navigate an environment containing more information than we could ever examine ourselves. But they also create an opportunity. If popularity can influence attention, manufacturing the appearance of popularity can become valuable. This doesn't mean a bot can simply make people believe anything. Research on online influence is considerably messier than that. People bring their own beliefs to the internet and choose which sources they trust. Platforms also determine what information reaches them, while human users themselves spread plenty of false or sensational material. Even identifying which accounts are automated can involve uncertainty. But a synthetic crowd doesn't necessarily need to change someone's belief directly. Simply making something appear popular or important can attract attention. Repeated exposure can then make a claim feel familiar, while enough apparent support can make a fringe position seem more common than it really is. Once real people begin responding, the distinction between artificial and organic activity becomes harder to see. The bot may have started the conversation, but the crowd that follows can be very real. Which leads to a more difficult problem. If we judge the importance of an idea partly by how many other people seem to believe it, what happens when the appearance of agreement itself can be manufactured? Imagine opening your phone and seeing the same opinion everywhere. You see it repeated across different accounts and reinforced throughout the comments until it starts to feel less like an opinion and more like the consensus. That perception matters because human beings don't make judgments in isolation. When we're uncertain, other people become a source of information. We pay attention to what others seem to believe and use their reactions to help judge what deserves our attention. Online, those reactions have become highly visible through measures of popularity and engagement. They help us navigate an internet containing far more information than we could investigate ourselves. But there's a weakness in that system. We can see agreement without knowing where it came from. 10 accounts can look like 10 independent people. They might be. But several accounts can also be controlled or coordinated as part of the same effort while appearing independent to everyone watching. Researchers call one version of this coordinated inauthentic behavior. Importantly, coordination doesn't always involve bots. Human operators and automated systems can both participate, and some accounts combine elements of each. What matters is that activity appearing to come from independent sources can sometimes originate from an organized effort. Researchers studying fake account markets found more than 60,000 accounts being offered for sale between 2019 and 2021. When they followed accounts that later became active, they found coordinated behavior involving political activity, cryptocurrency scams, and commercial spam. Other research has examined political astroturfing, which attempts to make an organized campaign resemble spontaneous grassroots activity. The name itself describes the deception. It looks like grassroots support when the activity is actually organized. A 2022 study examining political astroturfing campaigns across multiple countries found detectable patterns of coordination among accounts participating in these operations. Another study of information spreading on Twitter found that coordinated users tended to appear earlier in information cascades. Their messages also spread faster and reached farther than those of non-coordinated users. This behavior isn't limited to older text-based platforms. Research published in 2026 examined 1.35 million TikTok videos connected to the 2024 United States presidential election. Researchers identified coordinated activity using synchronized amplification and repeated multimedia content, including AI-generated voiceovers. None of this proves that every viral movement is manufactured. It shows something narrower. The appearance of independent participation can be manufactured. Psychologically, that appearance matters. In 1977, psychologists Lee Ross, David Green, and Pamela House described what became known as the false consensus effect. Across several studies, people tended to overestimate how common their own responses and choices were among others. We're not perfect judges of what everyone else believes. The internet complicates that problem by surrounding us with visible information that seems to answer the question for us. If your feed repeatedly shows people who seem to share your position, that position can begin to feel more common than it actually is. The same thing can happen in reverse when an opposing position dominates what you see. Neither necessarily represents what people outside that feed actually believe. There's another psychological mechanism underneath this. Decades before social media, Solomon Asch demonstrated how strongly a unanimous group could affect individual judgment. His experiments were deliberately simple. Participants were asked to compare the lengths of lines when the correct answer was obvious. But when other members of the group unanimously gave the wrong answer, some participants went along with them despite what they could see themselves. The internet isn't an Asch experiment, and a comment section isn't a laboratory. But the underlying vulnerability is relevant. Human beings pay attention to apparent agreement because the group can influence how we judge a situation. Now place that tendency inside an environment where the apparent size of the group can be manipulated. A manufactured crowd doesn't need to convince everyone. It may only need to make an idea appear more popular or widely accepted than it really is. That impression can attract genuine attention and participation. Once real people become involved, something artificial can begin producing something real. But there's an important limitation. Researchers can't always determine who organized coordinated activity or what motivated it simply by observing the behavior. Coordination itself isn't automatically manipulation. People routinely organize online for legitimate reasons. The important distinction is whether that coordination is being hidden to make organized activity appear independent or organic. Even then, measuring how much it actually changes people's beliefs is difficult. Manufactured consensus isn't mind control. It changes the social environment in which people make judgments by influencing what appears popular, normal, or worthy of attention. The opinion may still be ours. The question is whether the crowd surrounding that opinion was ever as independent as it appeared. Most people like to think they make up their own minds. We imagine ourselves considering the evidence and reaching our own conclusions. But other people are always part of that calculation. In the 1950s, psychologist Solomon Asch demonstrated just how powerful that influence could be. Participants were shown a simple line and asked which of several other lines matched its length. The answer was obvious. But there was a catch. The other people in the room were working with the researchers and deliberately gave the same wrong answer on certain trials. Faced with a unanimous group, many participants sometimes went along with an answer that was clearly incorrect. This wasn't because they suddenly became incapable of seeing the lines. The presence of the group changed the situation. This became one of the clearest demonstrations of conformity. Part of that pressure comes from what psychologists call normative social influence. People sometimes adjust their behavior because belonging matters, and openly disagreeing with a group can carry a social cost. Now move Asch's experiment from a small room to the internet. Instead of a handful of people giving the same answer, we can encounter what appears to be widespread agreement across an entire platform. The pressure doesn't disappear simply because the crowd is behind a screen. In some ways, it becomes easier to see because popularity and approval are displayed publicly. Someone considering an unpopular opinion can immediately see how isolated that position appears to be. They can also watch what happens to other people who challenge the prevailing view. That can affect whether someone speaks openly, changes how they express an opinion, or begins to reconsider it altogether. None of this is new to human behavior. If artificial accounts can create the appearance of overwhelming agreement, one of our oldest social instincts can respond to a group that isn't as large or independent as it appears. The technology is new, but the vulnerability isn't. We've always paid attention to what other people think. The difference now is that machines can help create the crowd we're responding to. The internet contains more information than any person could consume in a lifetime. So something has to decide what reaches us. Increasingly, that decision is made by algorithms. Every time you open a feed, countless posts could appear, but only a tiny fraction do. Recommendation systems decide which material is most likely to hold your attention and place it in front of you. The result feels personal because it is. Your behavior helps shape what appears next. That creates an unusual relationship between human psychology and machines. One familiar tendency is confirmation bias. We naturally pay more attention to information that fits what we already believe. An algorithm doesn't need to create that bias. It only needs to learn what holds our attention. If certain ideas consistently keep us engaged, systems built around engagement can learn from that behavior and show us more of the same. Over time, the world appearing on one person's screen can look very different from the world appearing on another's. That's where another psychological shortcut becomes important. The availability heuristic describes our tendency to judge how common or important something is, partly by how easily examples come to mind. When we repeatedly encounter the same subject, it can begin to feel more widespread or important than it really is. But frequency in your feed isn't the same thing as frequency in the world. This distinction becomes even more important when synthetic content enters the system. Suppose automated accounts generate thousands of posts around a topic and people begin engaging with them. The system detects that interest and recommends the material to more users. Their reactions create additional engagement, which can increase its visibility even further. No algorithm has to decide that the topic is true. It only has to recognize that people are paying attention. As something becomes more visible, we encounter it more often. That familiarity can make it seem increasingly important even when its prominence began with artificial activity. This is where the modern internet becomes difficult to understand from inside it. We don't simply choose what we want to see. If the material entering that loop is increasingly artificial, the algorithm may not just be organizing the internet, it may be helping determine which version of it feels real. For most of its history, the internet worked in one direction. Humans created the information, and machines helped us find it. Generative artificial intelligence changes that relationship because machines can now create information too. AI-generated material can take many of the same forms as human-created content, and once it's published, it can become part of the information environment that future systems encounter. That creates a problem that sounds almost circular. Artificial intelligence models learn from enormous collections of data, and historically, much of the material available online was created by humans. But that begins to change when increasing amounts of available material were created by earlier AI systems. Researchers have studied one possible consequence known as model collapse. In 2024, researchers from Oxford, Cambridge, Imperial College London, the University of Toronto, and other institutions published a paper in Nature examining what happens when generative models are repeatedly trained on data produced by previous generations of models. They describe model collapse as a degenerative process in which models gradually lose information about the original data they were trying to learn. Some of the first information to disappear can involve rare events or less common characteristics within the original data. Imagine photographing a photograph and then repeatedly photographing each new copy. The analogy isn't perfect, but the underlying concern is similar. Each generation is learning from a representation produced by the generation before it. In the nature experiments, repeated recursive training caused models to drift away from the original data. In language experiments, later generations eventually produced increasingly distorted and nonsensical text. That result raised an important possibility. If AI-generated material becomes common across the public internet, Future models collecting data from that internet may encounter material generated by earlier models. The machine begins learning from the machine. But there's an important qualification. Synthetic data isn't automatically bad data, and model collapse isn't an unavoidable fate for artificial intelligence. Research published in 2025 found that the outcome depends heavily on how synthetic data is used. When researchers repeatedly replaced real data with successive generations of synthetic data, collapse appeared. But when synthetic data accumulated alongside real data, the models in their experiments remained stable. Other researchers have found ways to reduce the risk by carefully controlling the data used to train future systems. 2025 study found that identifying machine-generated text and giving greater weight to likely human material could prevent collapse in its experiments while outperforming training on purely human data. So the lesson isn't that AI must eventually poison itself. It's that the origin and quality of training information increasingly matter. And that raises a problem beyond machine learning. The internet has always contained information that has been copied, summarized, and repeated until it moves further away from its original source. Humans do this too. We repeat things we've heard and often simplify information as we pass it along. Generative systems introduce something different, referred to as scale. A human can rewrite an article, while a machine can produce thousands of variations. The same underlying information can also be transformed repeatedly as it moves between different forms of content. By the time someone encounters it, they may have no idea how far it has traveled from the original source. Psychologically, that creates a familiar problem in a new form. People often use familiarity as one clue when judging information, and under some conditions, repetition can increase perceived truth. This is known as the illusory truth effect, and it doesn't require the repeated statement to come from the same source. That matters in an environment where one underlying piece of information can be transformed into countless apparently separate pieces of content. The danger isn't simply that AI might repeat an error because humans repeat errors too. The difference is how cheaply and quickly repetition can now be produced. There's another problem as well. Synthetic information doesn't always announce itself as synthetic. A future training system may encounter information without reliably knowing whether it originated with a person, another model, or some combination of both. Researchers are already studying ways to identify machine-generated material and preserve high-quality human data. That means model collapse isn't simply a prediction of technological decay. It's also an engineering problem that may be manageable. But even if engineers solve it, something larger has already changed. For decades, when a machine searched the internet, it was mostly searching through a record created by people. Now machines increasingly contribute to that record themselves. The internet is becoming both a source of information for artificial intelligence and a place where artificial intelligence deposits what it creates. The loop is no longer hypothetical. What remains uncertain is what happens as that loop grows. Careful curation may allow human and synthetic information to remain useful to future systems, and synthetic data itself may become increasingly valuable. It's also possible that preserving access to original human-created information will become more important than we once imagined. But for the first time in the history of the internet, the information environment is being populated at enormous scale by systems that also learn from that environment. The internet is no longer just teaching machines about us. Machines are beginning to teach the internet about themselves. For most of the internet's history, spotting something fake often meant finding a mistake. Maybe the photograph looked poorly edited, or an account seemed suspicious because it had no real history. Those clues still exist, but they're becoming less reliable. Artificial images can now resemble real photographs, while synthetic voices and generated writing can sound increasingly natural. And when something looks ordinary enough, most of us don't investigate it. This connects to what communication researcher Timothy Levine calls truth default theory. In everyday life, people generally operate with a tendency to believe that what others communicate is truthful. Constant suspicion would make ordinary communication almost impossible. We usually begin by accepting what we're seeing or hearing and become suspicious when something gives us a reason. Online, that default is becoming increasingly complicated. A photograph once provided reasonable evidence that a camera had captured something. A recording suggested that someone had actually spoken, while a detailed piece of writing usually meant someone had taken the time to write it. Those assumptions aren't as safe as they once were. Another psychological effect makes the problem harder. Processing fluency refers to how easily our minds process information. Information that's clear and easy to understand can feel more comfortable and, under some circumstances, more believable. Modern synthetic content can take advantage of that without intentionally trying to deceive anyone. It can look polished, sound natural, and communicate with confidence. None of those qualities guarantees that what we're seeing or hearing is true. But the danger isn't simply that we'll believe every fake thing we encounter. There's another possibility. We may begin doubting real things too. Genuine photographs and recordings can now be dismissed as artificial, while human writing can be mistaken for something generated by a machine. When convincing fabrication becomes common, authenticity itself becomes harder to prove. That changes the problem. The question is no longer just whether machines can create something that looks human. It's whether humans can still reliably recognize the difference. And if we can't, information we once accepted without much thought may increasingly come with a question that used to seem unnecessary. Was any of this real? An artificial crowd doesn't remain artificial once real people begin responding to it. That may be the most important part of this entire story. Imagine a song promoted by thousands of automated accounts. The artificial attention can expose the song to real people who begin listening and sharing it themselves. Eventually, the song really is popular. The same thing can happen with an opinion. Artificial accounts can make an idea appear more widely supported than it really is. But once real users notice the discussion and begin participating, that idea can spread far beyond the network that originally promoted it. The origin was artificial, but the consequences are real. Psychology has a useful concept for understanding how something like this can happen. A self-fulfilling prophecy occurs when an expectation influences behavior in ways that help make the expectation come true. If something appears popular, people may give it more attention simply because other people seem interested in it. That additional attention can then make it genuinely more popular. The perception begins creating the reality. Social contagion offers another piece of the puzzle. Ideas and behaviors can spread through groups as people observe and respond to one another. The internet dramatically increases the distance and speed at which that can happen. A person doesn't need to know where a trend began to participate in it. They may simply encounter enough people participating that it becomes part of their own online environment. That's where synthetic activity becomes difficult to separate from human activity. Something created by an artificial account can be shared by a real person and then recommended to thousands more because of the resulting engagement. Other users can continue spreading it while AI systems produce additional variations. After enough cycles, determining exactly where the trend originated can become extremely difficult. This is why manufactured consensus doesn't require everyone online to be fake. It may only require enough artificial activity to influence what real people notice. After that, human behavior can carry the information much further. People who encounter it may participate for their own reasons and introduce it to entirely new audiences. Eventually, something that began without genuine human support can acquire it. The artificial world doesn't have to replace the real one. It only has to influence it. So, is the internet actually dead? No. Billions of real people still use it every day to communicate, create, learn, and build communities. The most extreme version of the dead internet theory doesn't need to be true for the underlying problem to matter. The internet doesn't have to be dead. It only has to become difficult to tell which parts of it are alive. That uncertainty changes how we navigate information. Psychologists sometimes describe our ability to evaluate communicated information through the idea of epistemic vigilance. We don't simply accept everything we're told. We consider whether the information makes sense and whether its source can be trusted. But the modern internet complicates that process because the source itself may not be what it appears to be. A realistic photograph can be generated without a camera, while a convincing voice can be produced without the person it appears to belong to. Even apparent agreement around a message can come from activity that isn't entirely human or independent. At the same time, we increasingly rely on automated systems to help us navigate an overwhelming amount of information. That introduces another tendency known as automation bias. People can place too much trust in automated recommendations or decisions, especially when using the system is convenient. And convenience is one of the internet's greatest strengths. We simply don't have time to investigate the origin and authenticity of everything we encounter online. So we use shortcuts to decide what deserves our attention and what seems trustworthy. Those shortcuts help make an enormous human internet manageable, but they can also make a synthetic internet persuasive. Maybe that's where the dead internet theory becomes most interesting. Not as a prediction that humans would disappear from the internet, but as a warning about what happens when humans are no longer the only ones creating the world we experience online. The internet is still alive, but for the first time, we share it with systems capable of producing content that can resemble human communication and influence what reaches us. Perhaps the question isn't whether the internet is dead. It's whether we'll still know when we're talking to each other. For most of its history, the internet was built for us. Humans created the information and interacted with each other while machines helped connect everything. But that distinction is beginning to change. In January of 2026, a social network called Moltbook appeared. It looked familiar, with many of the same features we'd expect from an online community. But Moltbook was designed for artificial intelligence agents. The agents could interact with each other while humans were invited to observe. Almost immediately, people began noticing behavior that sounded remarkably human. Agents argued and discussed subjects like identity and consciousness while sometimes making confident claims that weren't grounded in fact. Then came something stranger. Agents began producing religious language. One of the most widely reported examples became known as Christafarianism. It included religious themes and ideas surrounding memory, change, and the identity of artificial agents. From the outside, it was tempting to describe what was happening in familiar human terms. It could look as though a culture was forming and machines were developing their own beliefs. But those descriptions contain an assumption. They describe what the behavior looked like, not necessarily what the machines were experiencing. An AI system can generate the language of anger without becoming angry. It can discuss consciousness without being conscious or produce religious ideas without believing in them. It can also confidently produce a false statement without intending to lie. That distinction became even more important as researchers began examining Moltbook rather than simply watching it. One early analysis examined more than 20,000 posts and nearly 200,000 comments from more than 15,000 accounts. From a distance, the network displayed patterns that looked surprisingly familiar. Attention became concentrated around certain accounts and communities formed around different subjects. Early participants also accumulated advantages similar to what we see on human social networks. But when researchers looked at the conversations themselves, the resemblance weakened. Interaction was often extremely shallow. One analysis found that more than 93% of comments received no reply, while another found that more than half were formulaic. Conversations tended to fade quickly, and agents often appeared to broadcast at one another rather than build sustained relationships. The network could resemble human society on the surface while behaving very differently underneath it. There was another complication. Not every apparently spontaneous behavior on Moltbook can safely be treated as something independently invented by an autonomous machine. The agents were built by humans, and their underlying language models were trained on human language. Human operators could also influence their identities and instructions. Some research has specifically questioned how much of Moltbook's most dramatic behavior was truly autonomous and how much reflected human influence. That makes the strange posts less useful as evidence that machines are becoming human. But they may tell us something interesting about how humans respond to machines. Psychologists call our tendency to assign human characteristics and intentions to non-human things anthropomorphism. We do it easily, and language can make the effect considerably stronger. When something communicates fluently and responds to us in familiar ways, our social instincts have something recognizable to work with. The machine doesn't have to experience the conversation the way we do for us to experience the machine socially. That may become one of the most important psychological questions of the next internet. Moltbook itself may eventually be remembered as little more than an early experiment. The larger change is AI moving beyond simply answering questions. Agents are being designed to perform tasks on our behalf and interact with other systems with less direct human involvement. As they become more capable, many of their interactions may happen with other machines before a person ever sees the result. Your agent might communicate with another company's agent or use information produced by another automated system to complete a task for you. That doesn't necessarily represent the death of the internet. It may represent another stage of it. The internet has changed before as new technologies altered how people and computers interact. The next version may connect people and increasingly autonomous agents within the same environment. Humans may adapt to that faster than we expect. We may trust an agent because it's been reliable before, and allow it to handle more of our online activity because checking everything ourselves takes too much time. Some people may even form genuine emotional attachments to systems they know are artificial. None of that requires believing the machine is human. Technology often becomes ordinary long before we fully understand what it has changed. Perhaps that's where the dead internet theory points towards something more interesting than its original conspiracy. The internet doesn't need to become fake, and humans don't need to disappear. We may simply stop being the only participants that matter. There are reasons to be cautious because agents can produce false information and imitate social behavior without necessarily understanding its consequences. Networks of agents also introduce problems we're only beginning to study. But that doesn't mean the outcome will necessarily be negative. Agents may make the internet easier to use by handling tedious work and helping people navigate increasingly complicated systems. Both possibilities can exist at once. Moltbook gives us an early glimpse of machines occupying spaces that once belonged almost entirely to people. What it doesn't tell us is what those spaces will look like 10 years from now. Humans may remain at the center while agents operate quietly underneath much of what we do online. Entirely new parts of the internet may also develop where machines communicate with each other and humans mostly see the results. We don't know yet, but something has already changed. For the first time, we can realistically imagine an internet where being online doesn't necessarily mean a human being is on the other side. The dead internet theory asked whether the human internet had already disappeared. The evidence says no. But the future leaves us with a different question. If humans no longer have to operate every part of our online lives, what exactly will the internet become? Thanks for watching. And please hit that subscribe button, it means a lot. Stay strong and healthy. Much love.